Halloween is back, and so are the masters of ghoulish beer. Hello and welcome back to the channel, and happy Halloween. It is that time of year again, and today we're kicking off the first of three kind of scary or Halloween themed beers with this, a brand new stout from Hobgoblin, I guess the originators of the creepy beer. Now for this one I am both excited and slightly skeptical all at the same time. Hobgoblin are owned by the Wychwood Brewery, who for the last 10 to 12 years have been owned by Marsden's in the UK, and let's be honest, the intrigue, the design, the structure of everything they've done in that last 10 or 12 years, well, has slowly declined. Let's be completely honest about that. I'm not saying that their core range is bad, but it's certainly not what it once was, although the beer world has moved on a lot in that time as well, so we can't absolutely say that for certain. But in my opinion, generally speaking, I enjoy new things from Wychwood much less than I did 10 plus years ago. However, dark beer is where they started, and this feels a little bit like a homecoming, going back to their roots, big, deep, dark beer. However, well, it's not all that big, this one. This is, I say, Hobgoblin Stout. It rocks in at 4.1%, which is not unreasonable, but it's certainly not big, it's not brash. And, well, they have done a stout before, a long time ago. It was called Black Witch, and I do have a little bit of semi-interesting history about it. For this review today, I'm going to be using a glass that I don't normally use, and this is an old school Hobgoblin glass, if you can see that. It's got the old design on it, and I treasure this thing quite dearly. Now, if you look on the back here, you can see on pint glasses when they were made, and this one was back in 2012, which is when I visited the Wychwood Brewery. And as an aside, it was announced just a few weeks ago that they'll be no longer using that brewery to make the Wychwood beers, which is a little bit sad, but it is what it is. However, when I visited their brewery, it was the first brewery tour I'd ever done, and I say I picked up this glass, one more, and quite a few bottles of beer, as you can imagine. And back then, they used to do a beer called Black Witch, or at least they had prior to the 2011-2012 takeover, whenever it was. They produced a stout called Black Witch. It was also called a porter from time to time. They messed around and changed the names quite frequently, and that was, at that time, one of my favourite dark beers in the world. It was fantastic. When Marsden's bought them out though, Black Witch disappeared. When I went to the brewery, I asked about it, and I was told that basically it was seen as too much of a competitor to Marsden's Oyster Stout, so it went off production. However, back in about 2016, 2018, it came back again, it returned. Was it quite as good as it was before? Up for debate, but it was still a very nice dark beer. However, it was quite a tad stronger than this. It might even have been kind of around the 5% mark. So is this a revisioning of Black Witch, or is this something entirely new from the Wychwood team? That certainly is enough waffling from me on the matter though, so let's get into this. Firstly, a quick look at the bottle. It's in that new Hobgoblin format. You're all very familiar with it by this point, I would imagine. It's not a bad looking thing by any means. Gone with the pure black and white colourway for the stout, which makes sense. Load of info on the back there, which we'll get into a little bit later. But otherwise, you know, it's on brand, it's doing its thing, and I'm just relieved they've brought out another dark beer. Right then, has to be said, straight off, that does not look like a bad glass of stout. Head's a bit foamy, a bit frothy. I don't imagine it's going to stay around all that long. What is there though at the minute is a solid, slightly over aerated, almost caramel looking head to it, just a smidge light. It looks slightly darker on camera as it normally does. The body of the beer, if I hold it up to the light, oh interesting. So this meets the criteria for a jet black beer. There is a tiny ring of kind of deep reddy brown along the bottom of the glass here as I look through it with the light coming in at an angle, but actually once I hold it up to the light, nothing's coming through. So far so solid from that point of view. Actually that head seems to have calmed down a bit now, and it looks pretty good, I think it's fair to say. on the visual, yeah, we're off to a very good start. Aromas then. I'm getting that quintessential Wychwood original Ruby Hobgoblin vibe, probably a bit of crystal malt in here. Very trad English hoppy notes. They're quite kind of fruity and foresty rather than being kind of citrus and grassy, if that makes sense. And there's arguments in there for tiny bits of chocolate, tiny bits of coffee, but they are pretty subdued, it has to be said. So it smells all right. It doesn't smell big or impactful or particularly flavorful, but what is there smells very nice. So no complaints so far. Let's get into it. Cheers, and cheers to the unofficial beer of Halloween. Oh, that has actually brought a tear to my eye. Now, don't get it twisted. It's not the best, most impressive, brilliant stout in the world. But they have bottled that long time ago, far kind of derived now from the current lineup, bit of Wychwood nostalgia, which for me just hits home. Like, it is what got me into interesting and different beers in the first place. And I feel like I've just taken a sip way back in like 2006 or something, where it's just gone, it's balanced, it's palatable, it's easy to drink, but there is flavour in that. It keeps going. It's, yeah, definitely not boring in the slightest. Now, truthfully, I am just so into this, I just want to go and drink the whole thing as quickly as I can and then go and buy some more, because again, that nostalgia is really hitting me with this one. It is properly like their old school stuff. Maybe not as bold in places, maybe not as directly or quintessentially that original Wychwood, but they have done an incredible job at getting the essence of what that was into this beer. Intentional or not, I don't know. Maybe it's just happenstance on ingredients, but yeah, it really is doing the business for me, I have to say. Before that happens though, let's give it a proper top to bottom taste test so you can actually understand what it's like rather than me just having a slightly out of body experience with it. So from the top then, on the front of the tongue, light carbonation, slightly bitter, a few kind of rustic coffee notes, but they are very low down. It's not an espresso stout or even a coffee stout, just that kind of slightly dark, earthy, kind of darker malt, but without any of the licorice or the chocolate sweetness, if that makes any sense. Once that's passed though, first third of the tongue, nice, light, but decent carbonation. Continues, think, I guess, traditional kind of forest fruits this time of year, berry picking. It's got those kind of notes, intertwined with something a little bit more rich, going more towards the licorice now with that. It's away from the coffee. It's not definitely not got chocolatey, at least not yet. And it's just very welcoming, actually. It's bitter, it's balanced, there's sweetness. It's just, yeah, it's doing it for me. The balance is absolutely there. Mid-tongue though, bitterness kicks up a gear. And from what I've said so far, you would think this is quite a bitter beer. It's not massively bitter, but over that kind of first half of the tongue we're at now, the bitterness does take the main role. It's not massively sweet at that point. The fruits are starting to open up though, get a bit juicy. There's a bit of mineral content in there. It's not super mineral heavy like you get out of, you know, Scottish or German beer, but there's this kind of, I think it's the water mixed with that slightly foresty, earthy hop profile that just comes together and produces something where you're like, okay, I'm getting, I guess, characterful water, if that makes any sense at all. Then as it gets to the back of the tongue, bitterness continues, coffee starts to kick back in, and there's just a hint of chocolate just right at the back there, and you think, is this going to start to level it out? As I say, the bitterness isn't too much, it's not overdone, but it is waiting for something to come and pair with it and just make the whole thing more of a seamless journey. Doesn't happen just yet, but then after you swallow, on the aftertaste, get that nice caramel hit that you get with that original Hobgoblin Ruby. As I say, it's probably the crystal malt if it's in this. I'll see if it gives us any info on the back in a minute. But it's that thing, it's that super, oh, it's not quite super sweet, but it's got this distinct, sharp sweetness that doesn't, it never becomes cloying, it's not too much, but it does just dominate and take over everything else that's happened before it. And all of a sudden, you end up with this bitter, sweet, just perfectly balanced thing at the back there. everyone who's watched my videos for a while will know that a balanced beer to me is more important than an outstanding beer, because a beer can be outstanding in one area, but if the rest of it doesn't back it up, then ultimately you're going to get bored of it pretty quickly. And this is sessionable all day long. Long into the aftertaste though, still feels like we're getting hints of coffee, hints of chocolate, just tiny little tips of the hat without ever really getting the end result, which isn't a bad thing. There's stuff to focus on there, stuff to appreciate, but it never becomes dominant or takes over or takes away from just the base brilliance of the balance that this beer has to offer. Now, I was going to be one of two ways on this beer. I was either going to love it or I was going to hate it. And it did what it needed to do to get me personally to love it. There are technically far superior stouts out there right now, but if you've got a soft spot for this brand in particular, then I think you'll be very happy with this one. I can tell you this is not a reimagining of Black Witch. It tastes nothing like it, in all honesty. That had a lot more richness, a lot more sharp edges, and also a lot more sweetness in different places. Maybe some of it's similar and it's just been all dialed down and leveled out, but the end product really doesn't feel anything like it at all. But what it does do is feel, well, it feels like an experience I was having about 20 years ago. And that for me is absolutely unrivaled. So it won't be for everyone. You'll probably buy it and go, this is just a slightly splooshy stout. I mean, let's be honest, it's thin, it's not got the mouthfeel, it's a bit tame almost by modern craft beer standards. But if I was sat in a pub Christmas week and I've got a choice of almost any beer going right now, basically, there's infinite things there, and this is on tap, I'm going to have to really consider whether I don't buy one of these, because you could put something that is technically infinitely better in front of me, but that nostalgia thing just holds so much balance, especially in an atmosphere like that, yeah, I think I'd struggle to turn it down. I completely appreciate that that is just my perspective, it's my thing, and as I say, most of you won't agree, but if you are like me and you do have that little bit of love for this brand a long time ago, give it a go, because I don't think you'll be very disappointed. I did say I was going to have a quick look on the back of the bottle to see if there's anything else of interest on here. The description is Hobgoblin Stout, a jet black with aromas of roasted malts and chocolate. I really wasn't getting a massive amount of chocolate, but fine. It says the earthy bitterness balanced by hints of coffee, cacao and sweet treacle flavours, a deceptively dark yet smooth and easy drinking stout. I think that pretty much covers what I thought about it. Yeah, earthy bitterness absolutely all the way through. Hints of coffee and cocoa, absolutely very important. And then the sweet treacle, that's that kind of crystal malt thing from the Hobgoblin Ruby that I mentioned. So yeah, their description for me, pretty much spot on. I think their description is maybe a bit amped up to what it really is, but it's not unreliable or untrustworthy. So there is that. It contains barley and wheat, and that's all they're willing to tell us. But where was it brewed? Now, the address given is actually their brewery in Witney, Oxfordshire. Whether this was brewed there before they stopped, I don't know. But anyway, it's a 4.1%, absolutely fantastic, sessionable stout. Now the weather's come in, the nights are getting darker, and for me, I'll actually be nipping out to get a few more, because something about it just works for me personally. This is one of those reviews where I have to be really careful, because I know subjectively it isn't the best, it isn't a standout feature, but I've said it about 4 times now. I'm going to wrap it up with one more. If you've ever had a soft spot for Wychwood, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. And that really is all I've got to say about it. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. If you haven't already, subscribe if you'll be so kind, and I'll catch you next time.